what we're going to do today is talk about bowl bottoms. And then, Bill, if you have specific things, make sure you let us know, because I kind of ran with the document that you had sent the link for. And there was different tools, different holding methods so that you could reverse your bowl and then finish the bottoms. So we're going to try to show you, I think we have 4, maybe 5 different options today that we're going to walk through. Ed's going to actually turn the bottom of one bowl, and then I'll turn the bottom of a bowl, and you can kind of, compare notes and see how the different people do it, because there's a wide variety of ranges for doing it. As long as we're on line, why don't you point it up at the board? So, just kind of at a high level, we got these steps for making a bowl, right? You plan your shape of your bowl, you turn the inside of the bowl and the outside of the bowl, then you flip it and you do the bottom. So that's the section that's the step we're gonna focus on today. And then you'll finish and you sign, right? So finishing the bottom, you do have to plan for that. So quite often, you'll dive into your chunk of wood and the shape will change 2 or 3 times before you're done with it, right? Well, you can't forget that it has to be a certain depth, and you're holding your bowl somehow. You're either using a faceplate with screws, you're using a chuck, maybe you have another way to hold it. But if your shape and depth of your bowl is changing, you still got to keep in mind, how much wood do I have left to finish the bottom, right? So you do have to plan for it. You got to make sure you know where you are as you're getting closer to the final thickness of your bowl. So then we'll flip it over and we'll talk about the different ways of holding it today. And then we remove most of the tenon. So and this is my steps too, so this isn't the only way to do it, but then what I'll try to do, once I remove most of the tenon, maybe about 80% of it, is that I start blending in the foot and the sides, because, well, I like turning green wood. So most of the time, I think I'm turning the final thickness before I take it off the lathe. But sometimes I'll twice turn. And when you twice turn, you always get the oval. And so that's a challenge, to try to blend that oval in and make those lines disappear. So that's a big step. And then I call it cutting the hollow, and it might be a hollow, it might be dome, but underneath the bottom of your bowl, when you put the foot down, and again, I like a foot because my bowls tend to move because they're green turned. And when I put them on something flat, after they're done drying, they always wobble. And if I have a foot on there, with like maybe a 1/4 inch of a ring, I can adjust that very easily just by putting it on a piece of sandpaper on my table saw, and I'll just real slowly push it back and forth and re-flatten that base out. So that's a step that you probably want to at least consider and understand how to address it. And then after I cut that, for me, after I cut the hollow, I still have the nub, and then I have to remove it. And then there's finishing too that goes with it. I normally cut something that's fairly flat or slightly concave. And I know a lot of people like domes. I like it concave only because I can put my little 2-inch sanding disc in there, and then it blends it in all nice and smoothly, and it just makes it a little bit quicker. So I've actually carved in the bottom of it already. I've tried a couple of embellishments where you'll put in some grooves and you burn them, you do different things, and that all can add visual interest to your bowl. So feel free to experiment with stuff like that. I wonder if we could do this. Where did I leave my iPad? Let's see, there it is. So I'm going to throw this up on the screen because this is not high tech. So you know, in preparing for this, let's see here. This way. I went around my house and I started grabbing a bunch of different bowls that I use every day. And I like to think in terms of thirds when I'm designing my bowls. So my bowls, I try to go for like 1/3 diameter for the base, for the foot, compared to the rim. And that's just something that I do. I think it's a nice ratio, yep. So the bowls in my house, I'm like, oh, okay, well, here's one. Oops, that's chili, that's the wrong way. Here's two. And then 3, 4, these are all bowls I use a lot. And when I measured the ratios, it was a 50% ratio, give or take a little bit. So the bases of all of my utilitarian bowls in the house are almost half, the bases are half the size of the rim. And so that was like, well, okay, that's reasonable. You know, you're using them, you've got soup in them or, you know, whatever. The other thing that was interesting is this particular bowl right here, make sure I don't have any glare, has the exact same rim and base dimension as this one, but they're different heights. So you get a completely different look to them.
Is that wood?
That's ceramic, yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I guess where I'm going with that is when it gets down to planning and you're thinking about, you know, turning your bowl and then ultimately doing your foot, that's one of those pieces that you have to have in your mind as you go. All right. Oh, yeah. Yes. All right. So getting back to the planning. I didn't plan real well because I forgot my depth gauge at home. But Jerry actually brought a nice little gauge here. Now, what this one does, and you can chime in, Jerry, if I don't do it accurately. But basically, you got 2 parts here on this base. And this one is kind of your reference point so that you know exactly, you know, where you started from. You take your point and you can look at where it touches your chuck, I guess. I always measure the bottom of my bowl, so I would probably use it slightly different. But this particular gauge has a threaded rod. You turn it out so that it gets to about the bottom of your chuck or the bottom of your wood, I think would make a lot of sense. And then you can lock this in down below onto the gauge so that when you come back later, it's exactly where you want it to be. And as you're turning your bowl, you can touch this black knob to the bottom of your bowl. In fact, I could do that real quick. And then when it touches, then you look down below, and this is how much thickness of wood you would have left to cut through. So this can be real handy, especially if you tend to be one of the funnel clubs, right? That keeps cutting through the bottom, of your bowls. The funnel club is when is when the bowl looks really good until you turn the tenon off. So this is a very handy little gauge to use. I think it's nice for getting you into a rhythm of gauging that bottom. When you do that, when you're gauging your bottom, don't forget any impact you would have on like the hollow underneath between the bottom of the bowl and on the inside and the bottom of the bowl on the outside. So if you do a hollow and you go up in, you're removing even more wood. So, but anyways, this is a very handy jig. And Jerry, you did an exemplary job again putting this together and varnishing it, and that's probably why we no longer have a contest to see who has the prettiest jigs. Jerry keeps winning. What I do to measure is just that I use that crisscross depth gauge. So I have one piece of wood that goes across, let's see where are we at here, that goes across the top of the bowl, and then it's got a depth point that goes through. When it touches the bottom, I lock it in, and then I can pull it on the outside. And then by resting it against there, I'll know exactly how much wood I have on the bottom. So that's, again, and you may not think of this consciously. If you've turned a lot of bowls, it might be something that actually, I'm going to put this over here, I think. Might be something that's second nature for you. But, oh, yeah, I can. Thank you. Let's see, what else are we gonna talk about? Oh, and then the diameter too. So a lot of times you're turning a bowl that's outside of the size of the tenon, like on this example here on the wall. If you have a large chuck, if you have different jaws that you can spread apart and a little extra depth, some people will actually take the bowl and the bowl will go down into the tenon, and then you're turning away less wood in order to increase the size of your bowl. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we all have, different types of chucks, and so if you're using one way, you have a different size shaped tenon than if you're using, Nova or Vicmark, yeah, things like that. So, all right. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, Ellsworth uses that technique to go down inside the chuck jaws quite a bit. He uses it almost specifically on his hollow forms. So a little tiny hollow form, so I can go down in, and he uses that to stabilize the whole thing while he's hollowing it.
Okay.
You get far less vibration than if you have a real small tenon on the end.
Oh, sure. Yep. So I'm not sure if everybody heard Jerry, but Ellsworth uses a large chuck on small vessels. So part of the vessel actually is within or inside of the chuck jaws. And that helps to provide stabilization. It's not hanging out quite as far. Probably makes it a lot easier to cut the bottom when you're hollowing. Yep.
I'm brand new to this. I've only been turning a short time. I haven't. My first attempt at a whole into my garage door.
So, thanks, Pete. So the question was, how much do we leave for the tenon? Yep. I think everybody's going to have a slightly different answer. What I usually do is I call it like two sections of the tenon, right? So there's the part that gets gripped by the jaws, and I use a dovetail jaw, okay? So that's going to be a little different than the ones that are here. These are one ways. And I'll leave around 1/4 of an inch, and it could be more or less 1/16 of an inch either way. And then the shoulder, I need about another 1/4 of an inch of shoulder that stays there. So about 1/2 inch is all I need for turning. And then I make sure that the dovetail on here closely matches the jaws, because that's going to be the key. This has to be a very flat cut so that the jaws are pushing against this way, against that shoulder, because that's where most of the gripping, I should say that's where most of the pressure is going to be when you're turning. And then the jaws that come in from the side obviously holds it there, but this takes the brunt of the force when you're using your bowl gouge on there. The shoulder does. Yep. Good question. And then I gotta see where I'm at here. There we go. So yeah, so this is the gauge that I was talking about. And then when I'm turning, I'll just take the gauge and I put it into the bottom of the bowl like this. And then I'll transfer it to the outside, and then I line it up to find out where the bottom of the bowl is and then how much I have to play with on the outside. Okay? And these are real handy. I think I've made a couple dozen of these. I brought some in and threw them on the wood exchange table and gave some to some friends. And the difference is I put a little set screw in. And I actually had another thought too, where I can use that same set screw for taking this actually out and then storing that side thing. Have a cross, a dado cross cut put in there so that it works both ways. Yes.
The red marks on there, it's the chop closed and then the other one's wide open.
Oh, okay.
So if you're doing the tenon or recess, you don't have to measure, you can just put that on the center.
Oh, nice.
And then just put the pencil line wherever you want it.
Yeah, so Pete said that on his gauge here, the red was for the fully opened.
The wide red is wide open.
Yeah.
And the small red, the close one is all the way shut.
Got it. So his primary chuck then is between the maximum opening would be on the outside, and then the minimum is the inside. So that's actually a very handy thing to do. Thanks, Pete. All right.
Bill,
Yes.
on that gauge that you were using, where you showed the depth of the bolt
Yep.
on the outside, that works really good if you're using a tenon, but if you're using a recess, you have to account for the difference from the shoulder to the depth of that recess.
Okay, so you're talking about the jig that just got passed around? Either one. Okay. So Kevin, for those that can't hear, Kevin was saying that don't forget, if you're using a recess instead of a tenon, that you're going to have to subtract, in my case, it'd be almost 3/4 of an inch, because instead of having a 1/2 of an inch extension on the bowl for the tenon, I'm going 1/4 of an inch maybe into the bowl or the plate or platter to have the recess for your expansion on your chucks. But good point. Pete?
Put a pencil mark on the outside before you mount it on the chuck, so where your recess is. So if you put a pencil mark 1/8 of an inch out or 3/16 wherever your recess is, you compare that against your other measurement from the inside. You see where you're at.
Yeah. So Pete was saying he actually will reference the depth of his recess with a pencil mark on the outside, and then when he uses the depth gauge, then he's got a visual impact for the thickness of the bottom. So, okay, very good. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ed, and I'm trying to think. Ed's going to what most people probably don't realize. This is called a coal jaw, and Ed invented these. This is Ed Cole from within our own club, and he invented the coal jaws. Okay, so he's gonna show those to you now, and I want everybody to oogle and ah at this because it's nice.
I get a residual every time somebody says it too.
You want this on now? Okay.
The one thing, the one thing I wanted to add for Tim's talk was wood turning is a sliding scale, right? So as you develop skills, you'll move from one technique to another. As you get better at a certain technique, you'll tend to gravitate to that technique, and all the other techniques you may not do anymore. I hear a lot of people ask, should I use a tenon, should I use a mortise? So the answer is what are you used to? What are you comfortable with? If you're more comfortable doing it one way than the other way, even if that way is not quite as safe as the other way, you're probably better off doing what you're comfortable with. So as you're learning these skills, as you're developing these skills, find out what's comfortable. Some of the key things that Tim talked about is how thick to have that. Well, you can have that as 2 inches if you want, if that's how you're comfortable. Start with 2 inches. You know, your fourth or fifth bowl, maybe you cut it in half. Your 10th or 15th bowl, now you're down to a 1/4 inch. Start where you're comfortable, develop the skills, and then move forward and refine them. Does that make sense to everyone? The other thing that Tim didn't talk about is you're turning this nice bowl on the lathe. You're using a chuck. He's using a tenon here. You're spinning it and you get a nice form. You got the inside all cleaned up and the outside's perfect. Now you're going to say, time to take off the bottom. How am I going to take off the bottom? Well, we're showing you different techniques today. But for me, the first thing is how am I going to reference this circle perfectly when I come back to it? And the answer is on this. Tim has these plugs that fit in the back of the, so you unscrew your chuck while it's still attached to the bowl. You set this in the chuck, and then you just give it a nice tap, and it puts a nice little divot on this back end of the bowl. So now when you bring up your live center, you place it in the divot, and your reference should be the same. So I didn't have one of these. I picked one of these up at one of the club meetings, and I tell you what, I think this is probably the tool I use the most in this shop. It's mine. Can't have it. Tim's got one for a 1-inch chuck. This is a 3/4 inch chuck. All right, so now you got your divot marked so you can do a reference on it when you come back to it. Now how are you going to spin it around? You take it out of the chuck and you want to get that off. So there's several ways to grip it. The first thing we're going to talk about is this is called a Longworth chuck. Basically, it has a mounting chuck on the bottom, so you can mount it right to the chuck that you've already got on your lathe. It's 2 pieces of plywood or plastic that slide against each other, and as it slides, your feet or grippers move in. This allows you to grip that bowl and then tighten it all down. So we'll do a quick little demo of that.
And is that a shop made?
This was given to me by a member. Apparently they did this project as one of the club projects. I'm not sure if he made it at the club or if he came home and used the skills developed in the club to do it.
Yeah, there's plans online you can find, you know, different jigs that you can make to use your router to cut those grooves. And our club probably, I don't know what, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years ago now. Jerry Kimberlin had access to the plastic and a large CNC, and he cut out those for people that were interested.
So now you're ready to mount the chuck or mount the bowl, and there's 2 ways to mount it, correct? You can take your bowl. This actually fit on the holes, didn't it? Well, so if we slide these all the way in, you can set the bowl over the top of them. Well, see, we'll get back to that with the cold jaws. Or you could fit it on the inside. And then again, tighten it up.
There's a bigger bowl in it too.
Yeah, we'll get the bigger one, huh? I think this is probably too big. Boy, I'm glad I'm not turning on this today. And got to make sure all your screws are nice and loose. There we go. Set that in. And there you go. And again, you got a nice divot here, so you can bring up your live center. Make sure it's in the divot. tighten it up against the coal or the longware chuck, then you snug it up, right? Pull it tight, tighten up all the pieces, and now when you spin it, you can turn the bottom of the foot.
How fast do you turn?
Generally, when I'm turning the bottom of a bowl, or the foot of the bowl, I go as slow as possible. I try to stay in the 700 to 800 RPM range. But again, I think it's a sliding scale where you're comfortable. If you're only comfortable at 300, then you should only turn at 300. Do they? Yeah. Well, you're dealing with centrifugal force, right? And this is basically a centrifugal binding thing. So as you go faster, the more centrifugal force you could be loosening it up. So that's probably why there's a limit. I'll be honest, I don't use this. I don't use this very often. With bigger bowls, I tend to try to use this. But most of the time, I use my coal jaws or my jam chuck.
Because you invented it.
Because I invented it.
Right.
Because I get money every time somebody uses it. You just send me your money now.
Cold jaw.
Yeah.
There, cup of coffee right there.
Why do you prefer the cold jaws over there? Because I hate my cold jaws. You know, keep everything off and on and on and off and on and off.
Well, the cold,
To your-
I'm insulted. The cold jaws are far superior. Again, I think it's a sliding scale and it's how you get used to things, right? The cold jaws was one of the first things I bought. It's one of the first things I got used to. That's what I prefer to go to. Most of the time when you're doing this stuff, you're taking stuff on and off anyway. So I do use jam chucks a lot, and that does eliminate trying to take stuff on and off. I have several chucks. So I have a chuck that already is set up with jaws for turning, and I have a chuck that's set up for jaws for finishing the bottom.
So, Ed, when you say a jam chuck, are you making the jam chuck each time you make a form? Or are you just saying that you're blocking the bowl with the tailstock against a jam chuck?
So I have a piece of wood, and Tim's going to go over this a little bit later, but I have just a piece of wood that fits in my chuck.
Yeah.
I use a rubber mat. I brought my good one today. I jam it in there, and then you just trap it.
Yeah.
Now, you can get fancy and turn a chuck for every bowl so that it's the right size, so that you can remove the tailstock and turn it. I don't necessarily need to do that. Any other questions about the Longworth? One of the nice things about the Longworth is it's already set up. Stay there. You don't have to move these for different size bowls. But the bad thing is, like I said, it's centrifugal, and unless you got it set up snugly, it can move. So if you don't want it to move, you can use one of these. Anybody know what this is called? Costs too much. Come on, everybody, repeat after me. So the benefits of this is it's attached to your chuck and it locks down. The negative is if you always turn this size bowl, you can leave it in position. If you turn a smaller bowl or a bigger bowl, then you have to move the grippers. I have a couple of different size grippers that I use. I have longer ones. If I have a vessel that needs a little more rim support.
And Ed, you do it from the inside or the outside of the
Yeah, we'll show you that right now. Now that we got the right size chuck on. Am I turning the wrong way or what?
No, you're going right.
There we go. So, as we discussed earlier and failed miserably, there's two options when you're going to turn the bottom off, right? You can grab the outside and squeeze in, or you can go on the inside and expand out. Choices, choices. If you look at this beautiful bowl, it's got a nice round shape to it. You may not be able to get enough edge grip on this bowl because of the curve. So then you would want to go on the inside. So you fit it over your grippers and you open up your chuck. My other open. Clearly you're not going to want to reef on this, right? You just want.
It's not your ball.
It's not my ball.
Yeah.
You're watching the gap here between where the bowl meets the jaws, making sure it's all even. Okay. I'd probably go a little bit tighter. Snap! One more pass. When I'm turning the foot, I'll bring the tailstock up. As you get closer and closer and you get to the final little bit, once you've got, the steps that Tim talked about, you got this blended, maybe you do a little bit of sanding, you got a nice concave or convex, whatever you're going to use, foot, or got your shape where you want it. Now you got just this little nib. You can back this away with this in place and just turn that little nib right off. Finish your sanding or whatever you need to do.
And I sometimes, if you're, whatever reason you're on the bottom of the bowl and maybe you're already finished and you just want some more security,
Yeah.
I'll put a blunt end in the tailstock. And just
Everybody needs a straight man.
trap the bowl off right there.
So, I'm sure I'm not the only one that has little pieces of wood laying around the shop, little scrap junks that you cut off, and you think, well, I'm going to save that. So I don't know if we can see that. And it's just a cutoff from something. So that, what I like about that is now I can bring up my tailstock, set that in between. Now I'm not scarring up or marring the bottom of the bowl. And I have a little more support. The other thing I have is a little plastic bead, nylon or plastic. I use this because I have one of those cone points. So the point fits inside, and now I have something a little smaller than this piece of wood, but firmer so that the holds a little better. And if you nick it, if you hit it with your tool or something, throw it out, get another one. Same with your scrap piece of wood here. You can see it's kind of beat up. I've probably hit it a few times. All right. Way it goes.
Well, you got all kinds of those.
I got all kinds of those. You know what? I can afford another one if you say.
Long work.
Hey! So that's gripping it from the inside. What we'll do now is, again, we got a nice indentation on the bottom of this. I don't know if we can see that. It's got a little dot in there from when we tap that. Place this over here. I like to loosely. So just tight enough where it's in there, but it can move. Now I bring up the tailstock. We're going to find that divot. We're going to let the tailstock recenter that. And then we're going to tighten it up. Again, it doesn't need to be King Kong tight. You don't want to deform the edge of your bowl, but it should be tight enough so it doesn't move. Looks pretty even to me. Nice and no wobble. So let's go ahead and talk about turning this. Generally, I turn with what I have in my hands. I have a, what's it called? For spindle turning. Spindle gouge. There you go. I have a spindle gouge. I don't use it very often. Most of the time I'm using my regular bowl gouge because that's what I have sharp. That's what I have in my hand. That's what I'm working with making the bowl. So that's what I have here is a bowl gouge. Obviously, you don't want the tool rest to be interfering with the coal jaws. I want a little more room for tool. So now my plan is we have what we'll call the gripper part, the bottom part here, where the tenons grabbed it. And then we have this shoulder out here. So bring the speed up a little bit. Now I'm just going to take passing cuts towards the head. I don't want to put too much pressure across it, so I want to get a good shot there. And I'm just going to take little cuts. Now I have this shoulder. And I'm going to take it and create a line. And then continue what I was doing before. So now what I've got is I've eliminated the tenon. I have a bit of a proud spot here where the shoulder was. What I like to do is take the edge of the tool and just put it up against it. I'm looking for a concave. I like a little hollow in my bottom of my bowls. And then I can see how much more I've got to take off. Now if I wanted to do any blending with the scrapers or the edge of the tool, let's put a little more hollow in. couple of things that I always do. I try not to come up on the edge of the bowl. So I'm trying to do all my work on the flat surface. That way I can feather this with sandpaper or something else, and I'm not disturbing my nice, beautiful final cut on the edge of the bowl, outside of the bowl. I'm also trying to put that concave in. Again, I'll check it. I'm looking for just a little bit of gap between the tool and the bottom of the bowl. It looks like it's pretty close to where I would keep it. I'm going to refine this nub a little bit now. Again, we're checking to make sure I got my concave. I lost a little bit there. We're going to keep working on it, refine this nub a little more. There we go. I got a nice shadow in there. I like my transition. Like I said, a little bit of sandpaper will take that little lip off. At this point, I would either grab a spindle gouge or my cutoff, and I would go in and just try to establish a shoulder. We gotta. All right, we're not going to worry about it.
What were you looking for?
Cutoff tool. Or
Parting tool?
Parting tool, or a, here, I got this. I'll use this. So I got a little bit of smaller gouge here. So now I have just a little nub here. I'll do all my sanding I need to do. Then it's time to take it off. Kind of back off a little pressure here. I have one of my little saws that I have on hand. And I just simply I like spinning it when I cut, just to kind of give me a nice circle. I'm multi-talented. There's the nub.
Keep that. You lost your bead.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you're good enough with a chisel, you could chisel this off. I have some chisels and I just scrape it off, then sand it with a sandpaper. The cold jaws is tight enough where it allows you to do a couple of light passes. There you go. light passes. The cold jaws is enough. A little bit of sanding. Whether or not you put any designs on the bottom of your bowls. Any questions?
So
Ready?
how much are cold jaws?
I can give you a club discount.
Okay. 10%, right?
Yeah. 10 or 15.
Yeah, mention Ed Cole's name at Woodworkers Depot, you get an extra 10% off.
Yeah.
So that sits nice and flat now. No wobble when you put it down. Still needs a little bit of sanding because I got a little ridge there that I left.
Do you autograph the cold jaws?
I do not. Too many fakes out there. Tim talked about the sanding, right? We all have the little sanding discs. Whoops. I have a drill that I use and I just, there you go. Go for it, Tim.
Good thing our club, it's mandatory you wear your dust masks here. Right, Wayne? Mandatory dust mask at club meeting.
All right, Tim.
All right, so Ed talked about the long mirth and he talked about the cold chuck. And I'm going to show you a few different jam chucks. So, like mentioned earlier, the jam chuck. I'll grab the mic.
Oh.
Thank you. So I'll talk about some jam chucks. So when I'm turning bowls, I started using the cold jaws for flipping it around, and I use the Longworth for some larger bowls. It's a lot of, I have the same size, and it's just a lot of chuck to be turning if you have a small bowl in the middle. So there's a lot of mass there. But as you get comfortable turning, you tend to get lazy. And what I do now is I just trap it between the tailstock. And there's a lot of different types of jam chucks that you can do. So one of them is if you're turning a vessel. And let's see here. Here it is. If you're turning a vessel, you can't nest it, or you can't cover anything very well with it. So I make these long jam chucks, and I usually have to make it for the size vessel that I just turned. And this one will go right to the bottom. If I was, I'm not going to actually do this, but if I was, I would have a piece of like neoprene. I would put some soft piece of leather, something like that on there to keep from marring up the bottom. Pardon me? Yep. Too bad your finger isn't long enough to feel how smooth it is. But Ed also mentioned, he's got the divots in here in the bottom of the bowls. And if you are using a faceplate, they use that little jig that he passed around. So it's a plug that fits in the hole of your faceplate with the pin that goes through. Because I'm always starting my bowls between centers, I just leave the tailstock mark on there, and it's there until I'm done turning. I'll move the tailstock up. And then reattach it at that same mark. Let's see here. What do I got so many things on my head right now that got to make room for them all. And so this one was turned a couple years ago. Actually, it's just been sitting, and you can see that it's out around and it's wobbly, but there's plenty of strength there to nibble away at this, cut it, and then I could finish the bottom. So that's one way. Excuse me, that's not a one way. That would be the Tim's way. Sometimes I'll have a really deep bowl, which is, a lot wider opening than I would have on a vessel. And this is one that I use quite a bit, and I might have brought the wrong jaws for this one. We'll see. And I did. These are just a little too small. But this one, the key here is you want as wide a rim as that you can reasonably use inside. So that wider rim will provide the stable base that you need for turning on your on the bottom of your bowl. If you could pinch any bowl you wanted between this point and the tail stock, but if you're turning a platter and you touch the outside, there's no support. So you always want as wide of a wood block as you can get. And this is the one I probably use the most. And this one, I don't know what that is, 2.5 inches, maybe 3 inches on the face. And then I will always true that up. Before I finish the bottom on a bowl. If you notice, when I first touched that, it vibrated. And so even though this particular wood is very stable, this happens to be mahogany. Every time you re-chuck it, maybe the teeth are biting a little more, a little less. And maybe you're using a different chuck even, and it won't run as true. So you always want to clean that up before you would jam your next object on there. And let's see, I forgot I'm going to use your new rag, Ed. Sorry. Don't hurt it, huh? So. Yeah.
I bought that with all the residuals.
Right. So, getting back to what we talked about earlier, I will, and I forgot my gauge. So I'm going to use the makeshift gauge. I'm going to turn, let's see, is this the camera? So I'll take an object. It could be, it could just be a tape measure even. I just happen to bring one of those now that I mention it. So you line that up, push it to the bottom and across both rims. And I got 6.2 centimeters. So then when you do the same on this side, 6.2 is going to give me about a half of an inch of bottom after I remove the shoulder here. So I have plenty on this particular one for putting my bottom on there. I'm comfortable, turning mine with just, a ruler like this, but I have gone through a couple. So stay tuned. It's not a given. No guarantees. And this was a real nice chunk of wood I got. And then when I got all done, there's a defect right through the middle, right at the bottom, and you couldn't even see it when it was a 1/4 inch thicker. Yeah, but there's a crack. Life's too short to turn rotten wood. Okay, so I have it lightly held on there right now, and then I'll check to see how the centering is on there. And I got a pretty good wobble going right now. I'm just gonna try this once without the rag, just to see if that helps. Yeah, I'm sorry, you got a defective rag. So it's a donation bowl anyway, so if I end up with a burn mark on the inside, we'll sand her away. All right, so again, you check the true. This one was twice turned. Turn it to about 1 inch thick, let it dry for 6-8 months. Then I turned it again, and it's a beautiful piece of elm, I believe. Got this from Paul. And Paul said he knew he had a crack in it, so that's why he gave it to me. I'll get even. But yeah, this is turning pretty true. I'm feeling very little vibration right here. So, the question came up earlier from the back, like how long are your tenons? And this one is that like 1/2 inch. So I have about 3/16 on the dovetail section, and it's just a little less than 1/2. As long as this is clean and your wood is firm, you shouldn't have any problem with smaller tenons. So if I looked at the size, I know that the size is pretty close to what I wanted. I'll probably make the foot maybe just inside of the small diameter of the dovetailed tenon here. So that would be my aim. I'll start by nibbling away. And then what I like to do is on the outside edge is I'll take that first cut and I'll determine like how deep I want it. And I match the rest of the cut. I'll just nibble away to that same level all the way until I start to create my nub. Yeah, a little fog action there. And for now, I'll leave the nub about the same diameter as the threads that are on the live center. The more you have, the more mass you have, the better it is for stability. So I just took a light pass across here so I can get a feel for the grain. And I like to, you can usually tell by the cut or the noise that you get on the end of your bowl gouge if anything is tearing out. And this happened to take a very nice cut. I can feel that I have no tear out when I came across. And so that'll benefit me when I go to make my final pass inside the foot. So if I look at the size of my bowl, and this is getting back to the planning stage, I have about, I'm gonna call it 10.5 inch. So give or take about 3 to 3.5 inch for a foot would give me that 1/3 that I like. So 3.5 is gonna be just inside. So I'm trying to think what, yeah, you can see that pretty good on there. Nice camera work. So this is gonna be the rim or the foot. So I'm gonna have to blend in from the foot to the left, and then I'll flatten this out to the right, and then before I take the nub off, I'll dish that out so I get a little concave area. If you noticed, like when I turn this on, I'm getting real small amounts of vibration right where my finger is now. This bowl has already been sanded. Actually, it hasn't. It's been just scraped. So I don't have to worry about matching like my sandpaper to the previous grit. So if you were to sand this, which I probably should do right now, if I was finishing this, I would have this sanded before I do the bottom. That's normally what I would do. But if you have this sanded, let's say that even to 220 or 320, by cutting and then sanding again, you're gonna have to sand probably 1.5 inches or 2 inches to make sure that you get that different grits blended in with each other. So it's always kind of like this. You got to go back and redo stuff when you're blending your sandpaper in. So always be careful of that. So in other words, don't expect that this will be the end surface until after you've blended your foot in. So what I just cut right now, and it feels really nice and smooth, so I'm gonna leave it, is the foot. To the left here now I have a ridge, and that was part of the shoulder. And so I'm gonna carefully take that, and I'm gonna feel for the bouncing, because as I go to the left, it's gonna start bouncing on this bowl, and I'm gonna have to accept a little bit. You won't cut it all out unless you go way to the end, and that you're looking for trouble. So I'll probably go about 1/2 inch at the most to get that blended in. But I want to go right from, I wonder if I brought my pencil. I'm just gonna go in my bag here real quick. So right here is the edge of my foot, and right about here will be the other edge of my foot. And so this area here to here is what I have to blend in. And so this will be my first attempt to try to do it in that small amount of space. I also enjoy the look of the side of the bowl disappearing into the surface of the table, right? So you can have a foot that's pronounced, and it'll sit there and it'll give you a certain image. I like having that bottom almost disappear. So you want to have a very steep, angle right at that foot so that you don't notice the bottom edge of the bowl. Oh man. Yeah, I can't even see with this. It just keeps fogging. I don't know if this is a no-no, but I got my safety glasses on now.
You won't tell.
All right. So that first cut, I don't know if you can hear that, but it's fairly clean. It's not really bouncing. And then as soon as I get past that 1/4 inch, it's gonna go pop, 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 pop. And that's the old surface. And actually I cut too deep and I went right through it. I was not intentional. There we go. So I cut about 3/4 inch. It's a little bit high. I would probably scrape that initially. And this is a and this wood, if you get a chance to turn elm, you'd like it because this surface is very smooth already. But you can hear that bouncing, so I don't want to go any further on there. That'll be, I would use sandpaper on that. So I got the outside edge of my foot established. Now I'm going to go in, I'm going to cut my dish and come up behind the nub. First, I'm going to do a little more flattening cut. And I'm going to make the nub a little longer. So remember, every time you take a cut, it can be a practice cut. It can show you what you're going to be running into later. So it feels pretty good. If I take my straight edge and I hold it on here, I'm not much lower than the foot. And I like to have probably a 1/16 inch or more for that dish that's in the bottom. And that'll almost always give you enough room if the bowl changes shape later that you can sand that off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the recess right where that inside of the foot's going to be. So I will take and I'll cut in real quick and try to make this a quick transition to the flat piece, the flat section of the dished out area. So I'll hold my gouge almost parallel with the bedway. And I'm just going to come in real carefully so it doesn't catch and run out. And I'm going to dish it. So that's pretty good right now, but it's not quite deep enough. So I'll take another one. And my bowl gouge actually is hitting the tailstock as I'm starting here. And so now, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but you can see that it's dished out. I don't want it to be too steep. I don't want a right angle right in here, because when I take my my sander later, what I'll normally use is just a round pad instead of this star pad, and those edges of a round one will sand in that transition area very nicely. Yeah, I kind of liked that, but I also exposed some more inclusions in here, so it bumped a little bit. I could feel it on the bowl gouge. Could you hand me the tool roll right down there? Yeah, just kind of slide. Don't careful. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to change to a sharp cutter right now. I did to that. Because your last cut, if you use it on a freshly sharpened tool, you always get a better surface, right? That's probably the problem. It's full of. So I put in a fresh bowl gouge, and this will be my final cut. And if I did it right, it'll be nice and smooth. And I like that. All right, so now I have this nub, and this is probably the worst place to do what I normally do. So I will typically take this nub and I taper it down quite a bit. And then I get it to the point where I bust it off. And then I'll either chisel or sand off the last little piece. I'm not gonna do that on here because these inclusions go right through the nub. And I have this feeling as I get smaller, it could just break. I'll see how far I can get, but I'm not gonna break it. So as you cut this nub off, what I found out, and again, I'm lazy, right? So if you cut the nub down and make it narrower and narrower, but you leave just a slight shoulder down at the crotch here, when you break it off, it always breaks above the bottom of the bowl, right? Because it'll always break at the weakest point, and the weakest point is the narrowest. And so I always make sure that the narrowest part is like a 16th or a 32nd of an inch away from the bowl bottom. And when I do this, I'll even change to my spindle gouge, which gives me a little more clearance in here. So right here is the bowl bottom. And it's pretty proud right now. I got quite a bit to go. And then what I can do on this nub is I will taper it like this. And if the wood is solid, and actually I kind of it's not too bad looking. If the wood is solid, I've gotten them down to, between an 1/8 and 3/16 inch diameter right on here before I take them off. You can hear that inclusion bumping as I'm going down in here. But what I'll do is I'll just stop right here and I'll pass this around. You can take a look at it, and then we'll bust it off. But so it's kind of triangular shape because you obviously don't want to hit steel to steel. So I start out by the threads and I'm chipping away down. And then you'll see I have a little bit of a shoulder. I will normally make it thinner than this, but like I said, this bowl is a little suspect. Yeah, I have, but it's pretty much solved by me leaving that last little bit. Yeah. And then, yep. And I know I've shown this at other meetings, but one of my tools that I use all the time when I'm finishing the bottom, it's basically a carving gouge, but it's really got a wide open flute bend to it. So I can put this on the bowl bottom, trim off that nub, and the corners don't dive into the bottom as you clean that up. And it's just my go-to piece now. In fact, I don't even carve anymore. I just use this for removing nubs.
What do you sharpen that with?
Very carefully. Yeah. So that would actually, we did that a while back. We had a sharpening day, remember? We had a sharpening meeting. But do you ever see it's Paul Sellers on YouTube? Anybody ever watch Paul Sellers? He's really good. He's an English, British woodworker, and he's just very traditional and just great guy to learn from. And he has 3 diamond stones in a row, a 300, a 600, and a 1200 grit. And so what you do is something like this, is that you hold it on the stone, and I never use 300 anymore because I already have, pretty much that's stock removal, that's not honing. So I start on the 6, and then you rotate it like this as you go back and forth, and you try to hold the angles real steady as you do it. And then I use Windex for lubricating on my diamond stone. And then I'll do the same thing on the 1200 grit. And then I have a wooden stick with leather on it and honing compound. And I'll go about 30 times across the back to the point, and I could pass this around, but you're on your own if you cut yourself. But it basically polishes the steel. You don't want to see any scratches on the steel or it's not sharp enough. So. All right, let's see. How often? Well, it kind of depends on how lazy I am. If you want to be, a good carver, you would probably hone it every time you pick it up. So, but then you'd only have to do about 15 times, But if you picked up that gouge and you stropped it 15 times every time you went to use it, it lasts quite a while. And then you don't have to put it on a stone. You could probably get 10 times, maybe 15 uses out of it before you'd have to put it back on a diamond stone. Yep. Oh, for sure. And then how deep and how long? How long are you using it? All right, so now I'm gonna have to, there's gonna be a little intermission while I set up the vacuum pump. So another way to hold your bowls when you're doing bowl bottoms is to get a vacuum pump. It was a little putsy to make. I may buy it if I had to do it all over again, but it was still kind of fun. I enjoy a challenge. So there's a couple of bearings in here. They're sealed bearings, and the inside is glued to the rod. And then the outside of the bearing is glued to the inside of this casing. And so that allows the casing to sit idle without spinning, and it holds the hose going back to the pump. And then it allows the vacuum to come through the headstock, and it'll actually work with interchangeable chucks. Yeah, I bought the last 2 of these chucks at home at Woodworkers Depot, so you can't buy these anymore. Yep.
All the way from Sturgeon Bay, yeah?
So when you get a vacuum, I'm not sure, I think it depends on your elevation according to sea level, right? So vacuum, Ted should be doing this. He was the guy, he was our gas gauge guy at work. So we have so many inches of water column. So if you have a vacuum, can it suck mercury up a tube? How far? And what's like 29, 30 or something?
That's ideal though, that's not.
Yeah, that would be ideal. Or perfect is like, 29 inches of vacuum. So if you can get 25 inches of vacuum, you're doing pretty good. And that provides a lot of pressure from the surrounding air to be pushing that bowl, in this case, against the coupler, the headstock that you have.
So it all depends on the diameter of the pipe. You can have half the vacuum, but double the diameter, and you have a lot more pressure.
Yes, so it's pounds per square inch. So if we have a small chuck like this, pounds per square inch, let's just pretend, let's say this is like 3 or 4 square inches. So yeah, if you had the atmosphere pushing on that small amount, it'll provide, 20 pounds or 100 pounds of holding. And then I have a little bigger one here. This one wouldn't hold 25 inches. That's why I'm not going to use it yet. I still have to perfect my manufacturing. But this one, in theory, could create twice as much holding power because there's twice as much surface area holding the bowl, the circumference of this chuck. So the other thing is this valve right here vents to the air. And so when I turn the pump on, right now it's off, and it'll get 100% of the suction, the vacuum it's creating, will be pushed to the chuck. And that's too much pressure, like Pete was just saying. If you had a large thin bowl, you could crush it. You could just actually pull a crack right through it. So you would open this and kind of throttle it. We let in a little bit of air in through here. It will reduce the amount of force that's being pushed on the bowl against the chuck. And it's a little messy right now only because, like I said, I haven't had a chance to fine tune everything. All right, so let's see here. Is this one gonna fit? So we're gonna pretend that I just turned this bowl. So if you just turn your bowl and it's, you got the inside, the outside the way you want it, and now we want to remove that tenon, this is another way to do it. Let's see here. I had another attachment. I got to get at my bag. Or maybe I got to get at this box. Oh yeah, here. So this was an adapter that fits into my chuck like this. And then I'm not real crazy about this, but this is a mini Morris taper right here. So what I can do is when you have your bowl in your chuck, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, right? This will fit in here, and it keeps it centered. And so now I can turn on the vacuum chuck, and this is never, this is the debut of my jig, so it might not even work, who knows. And then you push this against it, and it's supposed to be centered, right? Alternately, we can use the dimple in the bowl, like we talked about before. So your tailstock can go into your dimple, and what I've found is that's probably is almost as accurate. You're not going to lose much of anything if you have the original dimple in the bottom of your bowl, and you're putting that in your tailstock compared to leaving it in the chuck and putting it up against it. Uh-oh, wrong bowl. And this is what I was afraid of. I'm only getting about 10 pounds, so. Yeah, right? It's very, exactly. So I have some, I think I got some other ones. Well, this isn't clean though, but it's actually closed, yeah. So that's too thin. Like Al just said, the vacuum is sucking air through the holes on the wood, but it'll hold it on, but just not well enough to turn. Yeah, we could bring those. I'm trying to think I forgot what I had in there. That's hickory. And let's see what we got in here. Here, this one I think will hold too. Just not as well.
Just take your time at 10 pounds.
Right? So this is getting about 12 pounds of vacuum, a little less. But yeah, I can pull it off. So we'll try this one. Yeah, that one's better, right? Yeah, we're no problem with this one. So that's one of your challenges, right? Is you got to have the right wood. Yeah, so what Ted just said is the curvature on that little oak bowl was a lot steeper on here, whereas this bottom on here is very flat, so you're going to get a better hold. I'm going to go back to the tailstock, and we'll put this on here. And so what I would probably do as I'm turning this one off is you can use it like a regular jam chuck right now. And then I turn this down, I can put the foot on. In fact, where's this bolt? Might work if the crack isn't too deep. Maybe I can do that. What?
I think that will leak.
You think it'll leak? It's got a crack in it anyways, right? So that's true. So this isn't too bad. It's pretty flat. I got surfaces that I could definitely cut. But for the demo today, I'm actually go back to that other bowl because I think I can get that to stick as well. So I'm going to go back to the tailstock. I turn this whole bottom using that as my reference point, right? Here's hoping that the inclusion and crack isn't. Oh, I only got 15. That other bowl had 25. So it's got a little bit of a leak through the inclusion.
Sorry, Tim, we lost sound online. We aren't hearing anything.
Me too.
If you can move it while you're sanding, but if you just hold it still and you think you're gonna sand a nice round bottom, it's not gonna work, right? So I'm gonna turn up the speed real slow, and we'll pretend it's centered better than that. But I can get the mill just the way it is, and what I like to do is just keep hitting that lightly back and forth until I get, the surface that I was looking for. And that's an advantage of the vacuum pump. Now I can hold it free. I can get at that bottom, and if my wood wasn't cracked, I could even use a tool on here lightly and clean that up. And I don't know, you can pass that around again. See the crack in there. Any questions on the vacuum pump? So there's.
You made the rod.
Yeah, I made everything except the steel faceplate. So this, I didn't have any long rod. You could do it either way, but what I ended up having was I had a couple of like 6-inch sections of rod. Now watch, it won't come on, right? I can pass this around. So it's a section of rod, and I used corian, and actually that worked out pretty well. I learned a few things about gluing. Make sure you let it dry overnight, like a lot of the glues. I just use CA glue. I use super glue to bring them together. And this is 2 sections of corian. For my lathe, because I have the same one at home, I turned this piece the diameter for the back side, and that keeps it centered on the back. And then this was the piece that I turned for the front. So I leave this together, I insert it, and then I put this on the end. The O-rings will seal it on this side. And I just made a little tool so that I don't need a wrench. Goes through the hole here, and then I use that to tighten it up.
So, Tim, alternately, Robust makes a fitting that you just plug into your hand wheel and it delivers the vacuum cleaner.
Okay. Yep. And if I had to do it over again, I would probably buy the rig, because by the time I thought through and engineered, took it apart, made some changes, because I ended up stacking O-rings in here to keep the seal. I think I would have been much better off buying it. But it was still kind of a fun project, and it does work. I get a lot of vacuum on here. I can pull it right up past 25 inches of mercury.
The one thing with the commercial steel, they use an O-ring instead of a flat steel. An O-ring gives you a little better performance to odd shapes and things.
Oh,
like
sure.
Flat.
Yeah. Yep. Is it working now? Yep. All right. So on the line, was there any questions there? I apologize for the volume, cutting out.
Yeah.
And then did I like bump it off or something?
Yeah, the switch was turned off.
Oh.
It always helps, when you have a problem, check the ON/OFF.
Yeah.
First.
Yep. Audio 101, turn the switch on. So, it's working fine, but I don't know how much those, see, you could also buy from Harrison Specialties.
Yeah.
They make the chuck, and this stem is permanently mounted in the chuck. And so you just insert the whole thing from this side, and then you connect the hose, and that looks pretty decent, but I think it was $150 somewhere in there.
Plus one is 110.
They want 110?
Yeah.
So I thought I could make it cheaper, but I can't.
See, Frugal makes them. It's up with all the fittings, everything for it. I don't know what it costs now, but I think mine was $150.
Oh, wow, all of the parts?
And the pump.
And the pump for, yeah, that's nice. Sure. Yeah, so the two comments from the audience was frugal vacuum pumps. So they had some options. In fact, where's Ed? Now you said you got a hold of him a while back, huh?
Yeah, he was all set to come and straight for us, but he contacted me and said that his stock is low. He's retiring this summer, so he's not going to restock.
Okay. All right. So sounds like frugal vacuum pumps won't be much of an option unless you get his last pump. But Ted also brought up you could use an air compressor, and there's a Venturi system that the pressure from your pump, your air compressor, will actually create a vacuum on one of these. And I'm not familiar, with what that is, but it's pretty simple. Is it, you have to buy like a box or something? Okay. And you can get enough vacuum to hold these too, huh?
They sell them, I think PSI might sell them in there.
Okay.
Perhaps the parties used to sell.
Yeah.
You do have to.
So I can pass these around.
You do have to have a pretty substantial air compressor though.
Okay.
Because otherwise your air compressor is going to be cycling constantly.
Yeah. I built a new house. We added lights, and those were parts from the lights that we didn't use. So you can buy those, you can buy them at Menards. They have those, but they were just left over. And you can buy a full rod too. It's just that I had that sitting at home.
Well, Jerry and I got a thing from Rubber Chucky.
Yeah.
It's an insert that just goes into the headstock on that side, and then you put a piece of PVC with a rubber seal on it,
Okay.
and that's
And it
how
works
we
just
got
fine, huh?
that mold.
Yeah.
And he gave, almost like he gave me that piece to try,
Yeah, me too.
and you said yours quit working.
Yeah.
But mine, so far, I've had it 5 years and it still works. It does squeak.
Sure. So I don't know if the club members on the Zoom can hear, but there's a couple of comments on how there's 3 or 4 different versions of fittings that'll fit on your pump, and we can follow up with that, or even at the next meeting if you needed to. But again, it's probably going to cost you $100 to $200 to get into this if you're buying it. And I don't know, I had parts sitting around, and I got a little more time than I have money, it seems sometimes, but it was fun. What's that?
Do you have a filter?
I do. I went to the small engine section at Fleet Farm, and I just put in the disposable air filter that you would normally have on a Briggs and Stratton or something.
That's all you need.
Yeah. Yep.
That's
So, well, Bill, you were thinking about this subject. Did you, any questions? No? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Also, if this is something that you're interested in, we could also make a day like here at the Artisan Center, find the open shop time, and we can have 8 people here. We could get supplies or pieces and parts and stuff, and we could put together these any of these tools that you'd like to see or work on. So yeah, so that's all I had. If there's no more questions. All right, thanks everybody. Yes, Larry.
You only sanded 2/3 of that outside of the bowl before you did the bottom. Would it be better to wait to do all the sanding at one time after you have the bottom of the bowl the way you want it?
Well, I'm going to say no for me, and my reasoning is when I have that bowl in the original chuck, it's as secure as it's going to get, and I'm just going to sand as much as I can because it is so secure and it's easy to handle at that position. But you can't get close to the bottom when you're trying to sand that. So I prefer to sand as much as I can when the full tenon is still on the bowl.